Until you claim ownership of yourself, you will be controlled by others. Carl Jung's words were not a warning, but a reflection, a mirror that you either dare to gaze into or spend your life avoiding. Most people do not possess themselves. They believe they do, but in reality they are controlled by habits they never chose, expectations they never questioned, and voices in their head that are not their own. They are not truly living. They are performing, seeking approval, love, and safety. The script they follow was not written by them, but by their parents, teachers, past lovers, childhood trauma, and fear. As a result, they act out this script every day, unconsciously and automatically, calling it life. Carl Jung referred to this as the shadow, the aspects of ourselves that we reject, abandon, or forget. The truth is that everything we push away does not disappear. It hides and silently controls us, making our decisions, choosing our relationships, and guiding our reactions. It runs our lives from the darkness. So, let's be honest. How many of your beliefs are truly yours? How much of your personality is authentic, and how much is just a survival mechanism? How often do you act from who you are versus who you have been trained to be? This is what Jung meant when he said that, until you face the parts of yourself that you avoid, the insecure parts, the reactive parts, the broken, ashamed, and needy parts, someone else will always have control over you. You will be owned by the people who trigger you, by the roles you feel trapped in, and by every voice that makes you feel like you need to explain, defend, or prove yourself. But the worst part is that you won't even realize you are being controlled. You will just call it your identity, and that is the prison. The invisible one that you carry with you everywhere. The one that no one told you existed. This is the prison that Jung spent his life trying to expose, so that you could finally escape. However, escape is not easy. You don't wake up one day and suddenly own yourself. You have to earn yourself, reclaim every inch of you that you abandoned to be accepted, every opinion you swallowed, every emotion you suppressed, and every truth you distorted just to fit in. This process is brutal because owning yourself means facing every part of you, especially the ones you hate. It means confronting your jealousy, rage, insecurities, addictions, false humility, and fear of being forgotten, unloved, or unseen. It means realizing that most of your kindness came from fear, not love, and that most of your silence came from shame, not strength. When you see this, when you finally see it, something inside you will either break or awaken, because once you see what controls you, you can't unsee it. And now the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? Most people run. They distract themselves, get louder, busier, more reactive, and more impressive. But the pain never leaves because distraction does not heal the shadow. It feeds it. However, if you stay, if you sit with the discomfort, if you stare into the mirror and refuse to look away, something else happens. You begin to take back your power bit by bit. You start noticing when you're not being real, when you're performing, and when you're hearing the false voice in your head. You start reclaiming yourself, not the curated self, but the authentic one. The one who doesn't need applause to feel worthy, who doesn't react to every trigger, and who doesn't compromise to be liked. And that's when people start noticing the shift. You become different. You speak less, but your words have more impact. You stop explaining, and you just are. You stop defending, and you don't need to because you're not playing their game anymore. You're not performing, you're present. And that kind of presence changes everything. It rewrites dynamics, makes people uncomfortable, not because you're cruel, but because you're free. They feel it. They feel that you're not owned by fear, opinions, or the need to be understood. You're owned only by yourself, and that's power. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that sits, the kind that doesn't flinch when tested, the kind that doesn't chase approval. And when you move like that, when you finally own yourself, the world treats you differently. They don't test you. They watch you. They don't interrupt you. They listen. They don't question your silence. They respect it because you're no longer reacting from a fractured self. You're acting from a whole one, and wholeness is rare. That's why it's magnetic. Carl Jung said, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who they told you to be, not who you had to become to survive, but who you really are underneath the masks, the noise, and the fear. And when you get there, when you finally own every piece of yourself, you become untouchable because no one can shame you for what you've already accepted. No one can manipulate what you've already integrated. No one can control a person who has nothing to hide from themselves. So the next time you feel reactive, defensive, or triggered, pause and ask yourself, who's responding right now? Is it the real me or the one I created to survive? Because if you're not choosing, then something else is choosing for you. And that's what it means to be owned. But now you're done being owned. Now you start becoming your own master. And the moment you choose that path, the game changes forever. Most people spend their whole lives building a personality that protects them, not reveals them. What you call yourself might not even be you. It might be a defense mechanism, a performance, or the safest version of yourself that could survive in the world you were raised in. Carl Jung warned us about this. He said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And he was right. We build walls, wear masks, and stay busy because the truth underneath all that noise terrifies us. Why? Because the truth is raw. It's the fact that you're angry, tired, and have lived your whole life needing to be liked, accepted, and loved by others. And now you don't know who you are without the role, without the approval, without the performance. And that's what Jung meant when he said, you'll be owned by others until you own yourself. Because as long as your identity is tied to their reactions, you're not free. You're rented. You belong to the people who clap for you, the ones you fear losing, and the past that shaped you. But the moment you start confronting this, not running, not distracting, but actually sitting with it, everything begins to shift. You start noticing your programming. You see the people you attract not as coincidences, but as mirrors. You see your triggers not as flaws, but as unhealed wounds screaming for your attention. You see your habits, the numbing, the proving, and the pleasing for what they really are. Survival mechanisms, not truth, not identity, just leftovers from the past. And suddenly you wake up. You realize you've been reacting your whole life, not choosing, reacting to childhood pain, rejection, fear of not being enough, and the roles you thought you had to play to feel safe. But now you see it, and when you see it, you're no longer a slave to it. That's the moment you begin the process of individuation, becoming whole, integrating your shadow, owning your flaws, and understanding your darkness without being consumed by it. Because your darkness isn't your enemy. It's trying to complete you. It holds your power, boundaries, instincts, suppressed rage, and ability to say no without guilt. Everything you needed but had to bury to survive is still there, and now it's time to dig it up, not to act out from it, but to integrate it, to say, yes, that's part of me, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. Because when you own the parts of yourself that once controlled you, you become something different. You become dangerous in the best way. You become someone who's no longer trying to be understood, someone who doesn't need permission to exist, someone who can stand alone and still stand tall. And people feel that. They feel the difference between someone who's performing confidence and someone who's embodied it. They feel the stillness, the calm, and the unshakable presence of someone who's not hiding anymore. And that energy disrupts everything because the world is built on performance. It rewards fake smiles, quick answers, and surface-level confidence. But you've gone deeper. You've earned your authenticity through fire. You've sat in silence with your shame and decided not to run anymore. And that kind of presence, that kind of authenticity cannot be owned. That's what Jung meant. You don't become free by pretending to be better than others. You become free by no longer being a stranger to yourself. So ask yourself, why do you still feel the need to prove something? Why do certain people have the power to ruin your day? Why do you feel guilty for setting boundaries? Why do you explain yourself when no one even asked? That's not strength. That's a fracture. But here's the good news. Everything that was broken can be rebuilt. Every piece of yourself that you gave away can be taken back, not in anger, but in truth. Because truth doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it stands. And once you start living from that place, you stop attracting people who want to use you. You stop being manipulated by compliments. You stop shrinking yourself just to avoid being misunderstood. You become grounded, rooted in who you are, not who you were trained to be. And it shows in everything. Your posture changes, your tone slows down, you stop oversharing, you start asking better questions, and you stop reacting to every opinion. You start choosing your battles and, more importantly, you start walking away from what no longer aligns. Because now you're not chasing love, you are love. You're not begging for respect, you embody it. You're not proving your worth, you own it. And when people realize they can no longer access the version of you that needed their approval, they panic. They'll say you've changed, that you're cold, that you're distant, but you're not. You're clear about who you are, clear about what you won't tolerate, and clear about what deserves your energy and what doesn't. And in that clarity, you find your freedom. You stop being reactive. You stop being emotional labor for people who refuse to do their own work. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You just live fully, honestly, authentically. And that's when you become dangerous to systems that thrive on obedience, because you're no longer a puppet. You've cut the strings, and now you're writing your own script. One based on self-possession, boundaries, and inner power, not outer applause. And that is ownership, not of money, not of things, but of yourself. That's the wealth no one can take, the freedom no one can buy, and the power no one can fake. Until you own yourself, you'll be owned by others. But the moment you do, you belong to no one, and everything begins to belong to you. If you've made it this far, you already know the greatest war is not with the world, it's with yourself. And most people will never win that war, not because they're weak, but because they never even realize it's being fought. They walk through life convinced they're in control, but they've never questioned who they are, why they react the way they do, or what unseen forces are driving their decisions. They think they're free, but they're owned. Owned by shame they've buried, owned by guilt they've carried for years, and owned by beliefs that were planted in them when they were too young to know better. And that's what Carl Jung wanted you to understand, that real freedom isn't about doing what you want. It's about knowing who's doing the wanting. Because until you can look yourself in the eye fully, honestly, and without flinching, you are being operated by someone else's programming. You're playing a character you didn't write, and every decision you make from that place, every relationship, every career move, every argument, and every compromise is not you. It's the version of you the world created. But here's the truth. You were not born to be a puppet. You were born to be a presence. And presence only comes when you stop hiding from your own soul. You stop blaming, performing, and pointing fingers at what others did, and you start asking yourself, what am I still carrying that doesn't belong to me? Because every time you react out of fear, you're being owned. Every time you try to please everyone, you're being owned. Every time you stay quiet to avoid judgment, you're being owned. Every time you settle for less, stay in rooms that drain you, lower your voice to be accepted, you're not in control. You're leased, rented, owned by expectations, fear, and the desperate need to not be alone. But now that ends. Now you walk into the fire of self-inquiry, the fire of truth, and the fire of finally asking, who am I beneath it all? And you don't ask that to get a poetic answer. You ask it to get free. Because when you start owning yourself, really owning yourself, things begin to fall away. The fake friends who like the mask, the relationships that were built on your people-pleasing, the habits that numbed your truth, and the guilt you carried from childhood. And what's left? You, the real you, raw, powerful, silent, and solid. No longer trying to be anything, just being. And in that being, there's no longer anything to prove. You don't react when provoked. You don't explain when misunderstood. You don't chase what walks away. You don't beg for a seat at tables where you were never meant to sit. Because now you've built your own, and it's not made of noise, it's made of depth. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? You are now awakening. Awakening to the reality that no one else can give you permission to be yourself. Awakening to the fact that your shadow was never your enemy, it was your map. Awakening to the realization that the world doesn't need a more polished version of you, it needs the real one. And that real version, it's not perfect. It's not always calm. It's not always nice, but it's true. And truth doesn't get owned. You don't owe anyone the version of you they're comfortable with. You don't owe the past your loyalty. You don't owe your trauma the steering wheel. What you owe is to yourself, to walk fully into your life with all of your parts, your rage, your tenderness, your silence, your story, and say, "This is me. I'm no longer hiding." Because when you stop hiding from yourself, you stop shrinking for others. You stop letting the world define your worth. You stop needing validation to feel real. You stop being tossed around by life, and you anchor. And that anchoring, that's what people feel when you speak fewer words but carry more weight. When you walk into a room and change the energy without saying anything, when your silence suddenly makes others question their noise. That's self-possession. And no, not everyone will understand it. Some will walk away, some will be intimidated, and some will try to pull you back into the old pattern. Let them misread you. Let them underestimate you. Let them call you distant. Because distance isn't disconnection, it's elevation. You're not above them. You've just stopped betraying yourself to keep them comfortable. That's not selfish, that's sacred. You've taken the pieces you gave away and brought them home. You've chosen solitude over performance, peace over proving, and stillness over chasing. And now you're no longer owned. You own your voice, so you don't have to scream. You own your space, so you don't have to beg for room. You own your silence, so you don't have to fill it with words that mean nothing. You own your life. And that is the most dangerous thing a person can do in a world designed to keep you insecure. So now the question is this: will you continue performing, or will you begin possessing? Will you keep giving away your identity for scraps of attention? Or will you step into the most powerful, grounded, unshakable version of yourself, even if no one claps? Because owning yourself is not about applause, it's about alignment. It's about walking through the world no longer needing to explain your existence. That's where the war ends. That's where the noise fades. That's where peace begins. Until you own yourself, you'll be owned by others. But the moment you do, you belong to no one. And everything begins to belong to you.